Well, Israel's bombing of southern Lebanon continued this morning, devastating strikes on civilian infrastructure once again, to the point where Benjamin Netanyahu just a few minutes ago posting this little tweet here, Lebanon continuing, which just, continuing. So sharing a social media post of all of the bombings that are happening, civilian infrastructure and otherwise, and hitting houses and schools and hospitals. That's exactly what he loves to do, of course. It's one of his favorite pastimes. Just take a look at some of the targeting from this morning and some of the footage coming in from this morning. Watch.
السلام عليكم. هذا بالكفاح والتعاونية فوق. أكلناها هلا غارة هلا بهي اللحظة أكلناها غارة وتصاوب حسن إصابة خفيفة حسن ظاهر وجهاد إصابته شوية بالغة. هي إجت الهيئة أخذتهم وأني زمطت.
So that's just some of the infrastructure being decimated. And an Israeli soldier doing a selfie, posting video of himself showing utter destruction. You would think, oh, this is Gaza, right? Clearly looks like Gaza and what Israel loves to do there, and total destruction. But no, this is Lebanon. And Israeli soldiers sharing nothing left. Not a tree.
Fruits of his labor.
Not a tree, not a school, not a house, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not only is Israel targeting civilians, they're once again actively killing journalists. They haven't stopped doing that, by the hundreds, by the way. Steve Sweeney is the bureau chief at RT. He was reporting from Lebanon when Israel tried to assassinate him and his crew. Watch this.
Further rocket attacks were reported against Nahariya and admitted. Fucking hell.
Intentional targeting. And Steve Sweeney joins us today from Beirut, Lebanon, with the very latest on this. Steve, thank you for your incredible reporting and bravery. And maybe you can just give us an update. We just saw the Prime Minister of Israel posting that video, sort of celebrating that it's continuing in Lebanon, despite what the world was hearing, that there is a ceasefire. Here is his post, again, just a few minutes ago. Lebanon continuing. So what is the state of this so-called ceasefire and the attacks that you're seeing?
Well, first of all, we should say that there isn't a ceasefire. There never has been a ceasefire since March the 2nd, which is when we called it the Israeli escalation in the war on Lebanon. This is when they started the bombing of Beirut once more. We woke up that morning with around something between 8 and 10 blasts attacking the capital city. Now, since then, 2,500 people, or more than 2,500 people, have been killed. That's according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. And the majority of those people have been killed in the south of Lebanon. Now, the previous ceasefire came into effect on November the 27th, 2024. And again, that ceasefire was never adhered to. Only one side ceased fire, in fact. There were something like 15,400 breaches, violations of that ceasefire by Israel over that period. That's according to the United Nations, the UNIFIL peacekeepers, that monitor that ceasefire. Now, those breaches took place on a daily basis. They were targeting civilian infrastructure, as your previous segment showed. I think part of that footage was of Bin Jabal, which is called the capital of resistance here in Lebanon. It's where Saeed Hassan Nasrallah made a very famous speech in 2006 after Lebanon had pushed the Israelis out during what they call the July War, and he made a speech in the stadium there, and he called Israel weaker than a spider's web. So this destruction that you're seeing on your screen now is seen largely as revenge. Now, there was intense battle for control of that city, starting after the latest ground invasion by the Israelis. They encircled the city, but they met fierce resistance from Hezbollah fighters who didn't allow them to take control of the city. So all of the destruction that you're seeing there Most of that has come via airstrikes. There were also a number of settlements that have been detonated, and you probably saw the footage of Alcantara, which was just a day or so ago subjected to this huge blast, this huge detonation. Israel always says that it's targeting Hezbollah infrastructure, Hezbollah tunnels, this kind of thing. But the reality on the ground is very different. And we've witnessed this firsthand. We've been on the ground for the past 2 years. We've been to, for example, Beit Leaf. The Israelis issued a map, and they said that there were, I think, 34 settlements that were harbouring Hezbollah weapons in the basements of these homes, and that those homes were then going to be destroyed. Now, we went to Beit Leaf as soon after they issued this map, and you've probably seen these maps that the IDF issues. They often issue them over social media. And we went to the majority of those homes. Now, as I recall, more than 20 of them were already destroyed. So there were no homes there. There couldn't have been any Hezbollah weapons in those homes. The rest of the homes, we actually went inside the basements, and they were kind of ordinary people's homes. They had, wood, like firewood, and ordinary domestic stuff that you would find in any basement in any city anywhere in the world. So what you're seeing now, and I think what's getting more global attention, is this whole-scale destruction of southern Lebanon. But for the people here, this isn't anything new. Now, we speak about what's happening in the south of Lebanon. We call it Gaza 2.0. This is the kind of the scale of the destruction that you're seeing. There's whole settlements, whole villages, towns that have been flattened. But this has been going on since, at the very least, since November 2024. During that time, there was the ceasefire was declared, and Israel was supposed to withdraw from Lebanese sovereign territory, but it didn't do so. Now, for parts of the south, that ceasefire was extended until February 2025. We were on the ground with villagers as they returned. But what was happening was that the Israelis were digging in, and as the villagers tried to return to their homes, the Israelis were opening fire. Now, this happened to us as a group of journalists entering one of the border villages, a place called Hula, where the Israelis not only opened fire on journalists, they shot at paramedics, they kidnapped or held hostage around 20 people. But what they also did was they shot a teenage girl, Khadija Atwi, her name was, and they left her to die in a pool of blood, and they refused to allow the emergency services to attend to her body. She could have been saved, we don't know, but it required intervention from the United Nations in order to retrieve that body. She was left there dying alone for at least 24 hours. Her family were very close by, but they were unable to reach her. And we'd like to say that this was a one-off, but this is a scenario that's been played out time and time again over the past 2 years. And the targets have been school buildings in Bin Jabal. They destroyed 2 of the municipal school buildings there. They've targeted hospitals again in Bin Jabal. They said again that this was harboring Hezbollah fighters and Hezbollah weapons. Again, we did a tour of the entire hospital, and we found a fully functioning civilian hospital with doctors and medical staff treating ordinary patients. So, like I said, we call it like a Gaza 2.0, but what you're seeing in Lebanon now is the escalation of this, the escalation of the destruction, and we're calling it like a Lebanon's Nakba. Of course, this is a reference to the forced displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians on the creation of the State of Israel. But this scenario is now being played out again here in Lebanon. 1.2 million people are now displaced in Lebanon. And to think of the size of Lebanon, we're talking about 20% or so of the population of Lebanon have been displaced from the south. And Israel has said that it wants to. We've heard the language from people like Smotrich, the Israeli finance minister, who spoke about Dahir, which is the southern suburb of Beirut, and he said he wants to turn that into Khan Yunis. And in the south of Lebanon, Israel Katz, the defense minister, has given the examples of Rafah and Beit Hanun. Just yesterday, he said that Hezbollah and the Lebanese government are playing with fire, and that Lebanon and the cedars of Lebanon will burn. So obviously, the cedar is the symbol of Lebanon. So this was a hugely evocative statement, and he said that he wants to destroy all of what he calls the frontline villages, all of these border villages. What Israel's done since the so-called ceasefire came into effect on April the 16th is create a Gaza-style yellow zone. So that means that some 55 settlements, 55 towns, villages and other settlements are now in that zone. They're completely inaccessible to the people that live there, the people that the land belongs to, and anything in that area is now, well, effectively, it's become a kill zone. This is according to a report in the Jerusalem Post that Israeli soldiers are being instructed to open fire on anything within that zone, whether it's an unarmed civilian or a Hezbollah fighter. So anything that operates within that zone is now effectively a target. Now, we saw a week ago, almost to the hour, the killing of a very dear friend and colleague, journalist Amal Khalil. Now, again, this is something your viewers may be aware of, because there was global outrage at the killing. Israel's killed 9 journalists at least so far this year, but the killing of Amal Khalil was particularly brutal. Now, Amal was very well known. She was very well loved by everybody. She was a daughter of the South, and she'd been working in the field since 2006. So she was a very experienced journalist, but what she did was very special. It was very unique. She would go from village to village, from town to town, and she would speak to the locals there, and they would share with her their experiences of the brutality that's been meted out to them by the Israelis. So she was a very, very powerful voice. Now, she was somewhere very close to that so-called yellow zone. Some say she was inside the yellow zone, but she was traveling in a convoy. The vehicle in front of her was struck by the Israelis. The two occupants of that car were killed instantly, but her and her colleague Zeneb Faraj, they managed to make their way to a building nearby to take shelter. They thought they were safe in there. Amal was alive and well. She'd contacted her family and her news editors and the Lebanese army to alert them to the fact that they were trapped in this building, and calling for emergency help. Now, as the Lebanese Red Cross and the civil defence workers and the Lebanese army tried to make their way to that house, they too came under fire. The Israeli soldiers, refused to allow them to access the building. Then a couple of hours, or an hour and a half or so after they took shelter, Israel then struck that building. Now, this was a 3-story building. It collapsed on top of them. It took 7 hours for the rescue effort to actually make its way to that building. Now, there was a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiations. The Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, was effectively forced to beg the Israeli army to allow Lebanese emergency services to rescue Lebanese civilians. Now, Zeneb Faraj, she was pulled from the rubble alive but seriously wounded. She was rushed to Tebneen Hospital, a hospital that has itself come under attack. While she was in the ambulance on the way to that hospital, that ambulance came under fire, and we've seen the images of that, with the ambulance riddled with bullet marks. And then, very sadly, when they made their way to Amal, unfortunately, the sad news came through around 11 p.m. on Wednesday last week that she didn't survive. She didn't make it. But had the emergency services been allowed access to the site of the attack, it could be a very different scenario, and Amal could still be with us today. So the situation is pretty grim. We can't talk about a ceasefire. It would be absurd to talk about a ceasefire. The attacks are relentless every single day, almost every hour. Somewhere in the south is being bombed. In the Lebanese capital, Beirut, there's been a slight reprieve, I guess you could say, although we have had a number of occasions where Israel has flown drones over the city. This is part of that psychological warfare against the people here. And just this afternoon, there was a fighter jet that was roaring over the city. So, of course, this makes people incredibly nervous, because it's only 2 or 3 weeks ago now that the Lebanese capital was again subjected to this blitzkrieg attack. Israel launched something like 100 airstrikes in the space of 10 minutes, not just in Beirut, also in Bekaa and the south. But again, I was sort of caught up in the middle of this when they bombed outside of the target zone. Yes, you can see on your screen there now, this was an incredibly powerful blast. And again, Israel claimed that it was striking at Hezbollah positions. But I attended the scene of many of these attacks, and these were ordinary civilian apartment blocks. So the destruction, and in amongst the rubble, you could see ordinary household items. You could see children's toys and this kind of things. And the majority of the victims of those strikes, more than 300 people, more than 350 now. I think that it's been revised upwards, because many of the bodies were unidentified for a very long time. More than 350 people killed, and the majority of those were civilians. And this is the thing: Israel doesn't distinguish between Hezbollah fighters or civilians, and in fact, it doesn't care, because it's been able to carry out all of these attacks, all of which are war crimes: the targeting of schools, the targeting of hospitals, the targeting of civilian homes, the use of white phosphorus, the spraying of chemicals to destroy the land there, to make it uninhabitable. Now, one of your previous guests was talking about the Greater Israel Project, and that's part of what lies behind this. And not so long ago, the Greater Israel Project was written off as a conspiracy theory, but we know now that it isn't a conspiracy theory. It doesn't sit on the fringes of Israeli society either. It's not just confined to the likes of Smotrich and Ben Gvir, who are part of the government, but also the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, you'll see with this the so-called yellow zone, and this I think makes it very clear what this is about. You see now that it extends not just to the land, but it extends outwards to into the sea, to the Kana oil field. I think blocks 9 and block 10 of this oil field off the coast of Lebanon. This could have been hugely transformational for a country that, let's face it, could really do with that money in terms of rebuilding the infrastructure on the ground here. But now that is deemed by Israel to be part of this yellow zone. Now, again, the Greater Israel Project is what the Israelis are calling it. They talk about security buffer zones. But if you cast your mind back to August of last year, the US envoy Tom Barak, he was in and out of Lebanon quite a lot. There was a flurry of diplomatic activity. But in August last year, in a press conference, the kind of the soundbite and the headlines from that came when he described Lebanese journalists as animalistic, which was obviously incredibly racist, incredibly offensive. But what lay behind that was this so-called Trump economic zone, which he laid out. Now, we've seen this in various different guises over the years, but this was a plan funded by the United States and with Gulf money from Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And it was branded as a regeneration project, but it's almost identical to Trump's project for Gaza. They're seeing this as prime real estate, and what it entailed was what they called these villages and towns and settlements would be depopulated, which is a polite term for ethnically cleansed, and they would be permanently, the people that live there would be permanently displaced. These are people that have lived on that land for generations. The land, belongs to the people. It's not, it's not theirs to sell off. But that was the plan. And now we're seeing this, the military assault by Israel, which is trying to take that land now by force. So the situation remains incredibly grim. The death toll continues to rise, and it's ordinary people, health workers, again, 3 killed in a massacre yesterday, that are bearing the brunt.
Gosh, some of the ways that people justify this, when you see the rhetoric online as well, Israel gives these notice of bombing raids. So, that's why this is justified.
They send text messages.
Yeah, they drop leaflets. They send text messages. I wonder how you follow that logic, because wouldn't Hezbollah be getting those messages too and just leave, in which case you don't have to destroy a whole city? That's one question. And then my second part of this question is, if Benjamin Netanyahu is going to put this destruction on his social media, what is the point of targeting journalists now that they're showing it to us? Can you follow this propaganda at all, or is it just propaganda that logical people should not give any creed to?
Well, just on the issue of the evacuation orders, during the war in 2024, we for the first 3 weeks we did some work. We investigated and looked into the time between the evacuation orders being issued and the first strike taking place. Now, you have to remember, these evacuation orders at that time were issued in built-up civilian areas, and these are areas that often have very poor internet access, and that's how they're issued, is over Twitter, X as it's called now, obviously, and they were issued sometimes in the middle of the night. So people were being alerted to these evacuation orders by gunfire. But at that time, in the first 3 weeks of the 2024 war, the shortest time between the evacuation order being issued and the strike taking place was 4 minutes, and the maximum time was 29 minutes. So that will tell you something about the kind of evacuation orders that are issued by the most moral army in the world. Okay. Large numbers of the buildings that they issue evacuation orders for as well were empty. They would issue an evacuation order for an empty building. And as you quite rightly pointed out, if they're issuing an evacuation order and Hezbollah sees the evacuation order, then they're not going to be there when the strike takes place in the first place. So this was largely a propaganda exercise to say, look, we care for civilians. We don't want to kill civilians. We're even telling them that we're going to blow up their buildings. But the reality is, in fact, very different. People either had very little time to get out of those buildings, or, as I said, the buildings that they struck were empty. It's the buildings that they struck without warning where the most casualties took place. And as you said, Benjamin Netanyahu is now openly sharing footage online of the destruction of Lebanon. But it's not just him. The individual soldiers from the Israeli Defense Force have also shared these kind of videos, and they've shared them proudly, them detonating and blowing up buildings, going into people's homes, spraying graffiti over the walls, destroying what's inside. And we saw a week or so ago in Debel, which is the one of the Christian villages that sits very close to the border. Now, there's a small number of Christian towns and villages where the residents had stayed. They believed that they were going to be spared the Israeli aggression, but you'll have seen the video that went viral of an IDF soldier beheading a statue of Jesus. Now, again, this provoked revulsion, and Benjamin Netanyahu responded and said, this doesn't sit with the values of the IDF, but this is untrue. And I've worked in the
exactly what the IDF values are. Yes.
Yeah, And it fits entirely with their values, and it fits entirely with what they've been doing in the south of Lebanon. They've destroyed, for example, in 2024, they destroyed a church in a place called Gaza. Not only did they destroy the church, they attacked the parish offices, killing 8 people inside. In Yaroun, they destroyed the church of St. George. They also destroyed the Imam Ali Mosque, which is very close by. But again, you've probably seen the footage of an IDF soldier destroying the statue of St. George. And perhaps the worst was the destruction of the site of Shemoun al-Safa. Now, this is a religious site for both Muslims and Christians. Shemoun al-Safa is known by Christians as Saint Peter, and he's believed by many Catholics to be the first pope, and it's believed that he's buried there. Now, the Israelis destroyed that during the 2024 war. They also destroyed it again very recently. There'd been efforts made to rebuild it, but they went in and they destroyed that. So this notion that the Israelis care about the Christians in Lebanon, well, it simply isn't true. And again, we saw in Klaya, which is again one of the other border villages, the assassination of the local priest there. Now, again, he was a priest that had stayed behind with his parishioners. There was an Israeli strike, and he went to tend to his flock, as I believe the Christians call their followers, and he went to attend to some of the members that had been caught up in that Israeli strike, and then he was killed himself. So this is entirely fitting with the values of the IDF. And again, we've seen that with the treatment of Palestinian Christians, and we've seen it with the Israelis spitting at Christians. I believe there was a church somewhere in the occupied territories where the church actually set up a camera to film people as they walk past, to kind of show what they've been subjected to. So this is, again, the investigations apparently are taking place. The IDF, in fact, in a propaganda piece, said that they'd replaced the statue in Debel, the statue of the beheaded Jesus, when in fact the villagers rejected the Israelis' offer, and it was Italian peacekeepers from UNIFIL that went and restored that. So there was a lot of efforts at face saving, but we keep hearing this time and time again. When they're caught out and when there's kind of this global outrage at the actions of the IDF soldiers, we're told that it doesn't fit with their values, and that there's an investigation. Of course, we never hear the outcomes of those investigations, and I think that they try and bury it so that people forget about it.
Steve, we'll get you out of here. I know it's after midnight there in Beirut, so I want to be respectful of your time. Just one more question here, and that is what the Cradle has been reporting about food insecurity and basically acute hunger, that 1/4 of Lebanon's population now is facing acute hunger because of the U.S.-backed Israeli war. 25% of the population is hit critical levels of food insecurity. Have you noticed this at stores? Food flowing in or food supplies? What are you seeing on the ground from your reporting?
Well, I mean, there are obviously huge difficulties, not just with food, but with medical supplies. And, that situation has worsened because, as I said at the beginning, there's 1.2 million people internally displaced in Lebanon. The large majority of those are in the capital, Beirut. And, of course, pressure is bearing down on the services that they would usually use. The shelters, the municipal buildings that the government opens are now packed to capacity, and of course there are huge food shortages. And the difficulty is that Lebanon, as a state, is a barely functioning state in many ways. So a lot of the a lot of the services are not provided by the state itself, but by volunteers. So the people are being fed, of course, by volunteers. There are NGOs and other organisations which are doing this kind of outreach work and getting to people on the street. But of course, coupled with this, with these shortages of getting food to the people, there's a huge rise in prices of pretty much all goods. Food prices have rocketed. The price of petrol has rocketed, which of course that has the knock-on effect of increase in transport costs and the increase in getting food to the people. So there is this growing humanitarian crisis unfolding here in Lebanon. The services are doing the best that they can to deal with it, but of course, there's only so much that they can do. And as long as the Israeli bombardment continues, I mean, there's whole areas, particularly in the south of Lebanon, which are entirely cut off from everything. Israel bombed most of the bridges that across the Litani River, which effectively separates the south of Lebanon from the rest of the country. It means that humanitarian aid, is unable to reach those places. So there are huge shortages, not just of food, but also of water as well. The damage to the electricity supply also has an effect because many of the villages, sometimes they don't have state electricity, so they rely on solar panels. And once those are destroyed, those are the kind of things that they power the water supply and water pumps. So the situation is pretty desperate right now. And with the continued Israeli bombardment and, of course, many of those services themselves come under attack by the Israelis as well. They accuse ambulances, they accuse humanitarian aid vehicles of carrying Hezbollah fighters, Hezbollah weapons, and this kind of thing. So they all become legitimate targets. So the situation now is, it's bordering on the brink of a humanitarian catastrophe.
Steve Sweeney joins us from Beirut, Lebanon, with this incredibly eye-opening report. I hope the world pays attention to this because it's being silenced, it's being suppressed about what's actually happening there, as you describe it, as Gaza 2.0, specifically in southern Lebanon. Steve, thank you for your incredible journalism and bravery and reporting, and we hope that we'll be able to connect with you again real soon. Thank you for staying up late with us there after midnight. We appreciate it. Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much for watching Redacted. We'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. It's totally free if you want to follow us or subscribe. And if we brought you any value at all, please consider sharing this video with a friend or a loved one on social media. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.